afterwards Bishop of Lincoln, whose character in the learned world is well known. In the same form with Johnson was Congreve, who afterwards became chaplain to Archbishop Walter, and by that connection obtained good preferment in Ireland. He was a younger son of the ancient family of Congreve in Staffordshire, of which the poet was a branch. His brother sold the estate. There was also Lowe, afterwards Canon of Windsor. Indeed, Johnson was very sensible how much he owed to Mr. Hunter. Mr. Langton one day asked him how he had acquired so accurate a knowledge of Latin, in which I believe he was exceeded by no man of his time. He said, "My master whipped me very well. Without that, Sir, I should have done nothing." He told Mr. Langton that while Hunter was flogging his boys unmercifully, he used to say, "And this I do to save you from the gallows." Johnson upon all occasions expressed his approbation of enforcing instruction by means of the rod. "I would rather," said he, "have the rod to be the general terror to all, to make them learn, than tell a child, if you do thus or thus, you will be more esteemed than your brothers or sisters. The rod produces an effect which terminates in itself. A child is afraid of being whipped, and gets his task, and there's an end on't. Whereas, by exciting emulation and comparisons of superiority, you lay the foundation of lasting mischief. You make brothers and sisters hate each other." When Johnson saw some young ladies in Lincolnshire who were remarkably well behaved, owing to their mother's strict discipline and severe correction, he exclaimed, in one of Shakspeare's lines a little varied, "Rod, I will honour thee for this thy duty." That superiority over his fellows, which he maintained with so much dignity in his march through life, was not assumed from vanity and ostentation, but was the natural and constant effect of those extraordinary powers of mind, of which he could not but be conscious by comparison. The intellectual difference, which in other cases of comparison of characters is often a matter of undecided contest, being as clear in his case as the superiority of stature in some men above others. Johnson did not strut or stand on tiptoe, he only did not stoop. From his earliest years his superiority was perceived and acknowledged. He was from the beginning Greek anax andron, a king of men. His schoolfellow Mr. Hector has obligingly furnished me with many particulars of his boyish days, and assured me that he never knew him corrected at school, but for talking and diverting other boys from their business. He seemed to learn by intuition, for though indolence and procrastination were inherent in his constitution, whenever he made an exertion, he did more than any one else. In short, he is a memorable instance of what has been often observed, that the boy is the man in miniature, and that the distinguishing characteristics of each individual are the same through the whole course of life. His favourites used to receive very liberal assistance from him, and such was the submission and deference with which he was treated, such the desire to obtain his regard, that 3 of the boys, of whom Mr. Hector was sometimes one, used to come in the morning as his humble attendants, and carry him to school. One in the middle stooped, while he sat upon his back, and one on each side supported him, and thus he was borne triumphant. Such a proof of the early predominance of intellectual vigour is very remarkable, and does honour to human nature. Talking to me once himself of his being much distinguished at school, he told me, "They never thought to raise me by comparing me to any one. They never said, Johnson is as good a scholar as such a one, but such a one is as good a scholar as Johnson. And this was said but of one, but of Lowe, and I do not think he was as good a scholar. He discovered a great ambition to excel, which roused him to counteract his indolence. He was uncommonly inquisitive, and his memory was so tenacious that he never forgot anything that he either heard or read. Mr. Hector remembers having recited to him 18 verses, which, after a little pause, he repeated verbatim, varying only one epithet, by which he improved the line. He never joined with the other boys in their ordinary diversions. His only amusement was in winter, when he took a pleasure in being drawn upon the ice by a boy barefooted, who pulled him along by a garter fixed round him. No very easy operation, as his size was remarkably large. His defective sight, indeed, prevented him from enjoying the common sports, and he once pleasantly remarked to me, how wonderfully well he had contrived to be idle without them. Lord Chesterfield, however, has justly observed in one of his letters, when earnestly cautioning a friend against the pernicious effects of idleness, that active sports are not to be reckoned idleness in young people, and that the listless torpor of doing nothing alone deserves that name. Of this dismal inertness of disposition, Johnson had all his life too great a share. Mr. Hector relates that he could not oblige him more than by sauntering away the hours of vacation in the fields, during which he was more engaged in talking to himself than to his companion. Dr. Percy, the Bishop of Dromore, who was long intimately acquainted with him, and has preserved a few anecdotes concerning him, regretting that he was not a more diligent collector, informs me that, when a boy, he was immoderately fond of reading romances of chivalry, and he retained his fondness for them through life, so that, adds his lordship, spending part of a summer at my parsonage house in the country, he chose for his regular reading the old Spanish romance of Felix Mart of Hircania, in folio, which he read quite through. Yet I have heard him attribute to these extravagant fictions that unsettled turn of mind which prevented his ever fixing in any profession. 1725, Ætat 16. After having resided for some time at the house of his uncle, Cornelius Ford, Johnson was, at the age of 15, removed to the school of Stourbridge, in Worcestershire, of which Mr. Wentworth was then master. This step was taken by the advice of his cousin, the Reverend Mr. Ford, a man in whom both talents and good dispositions were disgraced by licentiousness, but who was a very able judge of what was right. Note, he is said to be the original of the parson in Hogarth's Modern Midnight Conversation. End of note. At this school he did not receive so much benefit as was expected. It has been said that he acted in the capacity of an assistant to Mr. Wentworth in teaching the younger boys. Mr. Wentworth, he told me, was a very able man, but an idle man, and to me very severe, but I cannot blame him much. I was then a big boy. He saw I did not reverence him, and that he should get no honour by me. I had brought enough with me to carry me through, and all I should get at his school would be ascribed to my own labour, or to my former master. Yet he taught me a great deal. He thus discriminated to Dr. Percy, Bishop of Dromore, his progress at his 2 grammar schools. At one, I learnt much in the school, but little from the master. In the other, I learnt much from the master, but little in the school. The Bishop also informs me that Dr. Johnson's father, before he was received at Stourbridge, applied to have him admitted as a scholar and assistant to the Reverend Samuel Lee, M.A., headmaster of Newport School in Shropshire, a very diligent good teacher, at that time in high reputation, under whom Mr.